Mary Startzman has loved gardening since childhood. When starting her own garden in Berea, she found inspiration in a gate she saw in the movie Barry Lyndon. Today, her backyard garden is an explosion of colors and textures, with surprises around every corner. Here we are at the very heart of Mary's garden. In fact, here's the gate that started it all 28 years ago. This is the entry to the heart, or the hearth in this case, of this garden. The fireplace is the center point, and all the rooms come out like spokes to a wheel.
My garden is pretty much divided into different, I would call them vistas, and they all have their own little special plants, or they're all special effects. They're all different, but they're all part of the one. That unites it from one room to the next to the next. The connecting element there is the fact that, of course, it's all the garden plants. But it's like going from one little microclimate to another little microclimate. It's all a nice little vista that you walk into and get to explore. The main start of practically the bulk of my garden was mail order, because you couldn't get hostas, or you couldn't get hydrangeas, or you couldn't get, they didn't carry them. And now, of course, you can find them in any store. When we bought this property here, it was all a blank slate, more or less. I wanted you to feel, when you came down the path and into the garden, that you were coming into a courtyard. And to have a courtyard, you got to have walls around it. I didn't want the typical fence, so I came up with the idea of using the cedar boards and making it curving. But then I didn't like the solidity of it, and I had those rings. I love rings. They come off a half barrel that had rotted, and so I would take chalk and we would play with where to put them. I love the way it just sort of hugs the interior of the garden. I already had a small in-ground pond, which is not very deep. It's only maybe 16 inches deep. I went to our local store, and they had little baby kois, and sure enough, I bought some, and I read about them, and they said, the koi will grow in proportion to their environment. They didn't read that page, so they just kept growing, and all of a sudden, I knew that they were not going to be able to winter in 16 inches of water. So that's how the koi pond got to be. It's made a nice addition. It's got an arbor on top of it with flowering honeysuckle, and you can put pots around it, and so it's just enriched the garden. Being above ground actually is easier to maintain. The filters that you have to clean out, you only clean them out twice a year. It's got a skimmer box, and the skimmer box does have to be cleaned out maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, depends on how much food they're getting and what season it is. Even the main filters in the koi pond are not that hard to deal with. You just take them out, rinse them, and put them back in. So I'll put out little metal tables on the hosta bed and put the bags of filter media on them and then rinse them so that the water and the nutrients get used. To me, they're kind of like the water-type butterflies. You have the butterflies that go in and out of the garden, through the gates and around, and you see them flitting around everywhere. And the koi do the same thing, but they do it in the water. From the small fish pond, you wander around to the side and go up to the tree house. It's just a lovely area to spend time up there, or if you want to go up there and survey and get a different feel for the garden, see it from a different perspective. You need to have a sitting area. So there is a sitting area right in the center of the garden that has a table and benches and a very nice stone fireplace. I love fire. I think fire is it's a fascination, I think, since the creation of time, the cavemen discovering it. There are paths that wind around away from the fireplace and then circle back to the center of the garden. And there's also, from the rose garden near the house, there's a boardwalk that leads you into a nice-sized, secluded, I call it the side garden. It faces mostly northeast, so it's very shaded. It doesn't get a lot of sunlight. But there's enough light that you can grow some flowering shrubs like hydrangeas or viburnums. The art elements in the garden are kind of anchoring focus point that helps the eye to rest on something that is not green, that is not flowering, and yet it adds another dimension of mystery or intrigue or beauty to the garden. I try to, just keep it simple and have just a couple here and there. But I think all those things are important. It raises up the level of the garden, the water, the statues, the fireplace. I was at the rehab store one day. I thought, I'll go in there and see just what they have. And I was walking through the store, and they had these two very old bed springs. And they still had horsehair on them. I didn't even know they used horsehair on them. And I thought, what lovely coils that mattress has. It's near the tree house, so it's sort of a barrier between the wilderness and the maintained garden. I love it in the evening when the sun is setting in the west and it shines through and lights up some of those coils. Those coils are wonderful. They're really lovely. I think they're lovely. I think they're interesting. Nothing was pre-planned. It was just a matter of feeling the flow. Don't do things in a straight line. Try to keep an air of mystery. Don't see everything at once. Because if you sit in one place and you can see the whole thing, all right, you saw it, you move on. But if you have a curving path, or you have a tree or that's blocking it, or something that's overflowing on a path, and it beckons you, and it's mystery, and you want to see what's on the other side. It wasn't a conscious effort of making rooms. It was just trying to make it interesting, mysterious, exciting. You want to go and investigate. Plants are very forgiving. They're going to come back. You can't kill them unless you really, really have to try hard to kill them. You prune whenever you have time, or transplant whenever you have time. Don't be afraid to try. Trial and error is your best teacher, more so than any book, I think. You'll remember it if you do it. And to me, that's probably the best secret of all.